finally, let's dig into this with NewsNation political contributors Chris Hahn and Mick Mulvaney. Chris served as senior advisor to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Mick was the acting White House chief of staff from 2019 to 2020. Mick, a lot of people, a lot of analysts, they predicted that former President Trump had to not only win, but had to win by over 50% or have an overwhelming victory. What do you think those pundits are saying this morning?
That they were right. It's a stunning victory for him. It really was. I didn't think he'd get 50%. The last polling showed him just under 50%, but he managed to pull it off, even with Vivek Ramaswamy pulling 7 or 8%, keeping in mind that most of Ramaswamy's votes are probably going to go to Trump. So you put those two things together, and Donald Trump is approaching maybe even 60% coming out of this Iowa caucus. So it's a huge win for him last night. Plus, he gets exactly what he wants, which is a 3-person race. Despite what you heard from Nikki Haley, if she had finished second last night, it would be a two-person race between her and Donald Trump. But now there will be 3. Ron DeSantis is not going away anytime soon. He's apparently coming to South Carolina today. So Donald Trump gets that 3-way race that he wants, where the anti-Trump vote will be divided between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, which is exactly what he was hoping for.
Well, you know, a house divided, what they say is a house divided cannot stand. Chris, I'm sure you were a little bit, I don't know, disappointed maybe that Trump did so well, or maybe you don't think that this is really indicative of any future winnings by the former president.
Well, look, clearly he's going to win the GOP primary. His numbers were very impressive on that front. But let's look at him as if he was the incumbent. If he was the incumbent president and 50% of his party said no to him in a very red state, which Iowa now is, I don't think that would be something to crow about, at least for November. Look, Nikki Haley has a chance to win in New Hampshire, which is a very different makeup than Iowa. But then the next couple of states are very much like Iowa, and I expect Donald Trump to carry them very easily and take all those delegates and sew up the GOP primary very soon. But when you have a third of Iowa Republicans saying that they think he may be disqualified from being president because of indictments becoming convictions, I think that's something to be very concerned about if I was a Republican running for president. He doesn't have to lose all, 28 or 30% of them. If he loses 5% of Republicans who think he's, should not be president of the United States, that's not enough to win. And when you've got so many people coming out against him within his own party, that spells trouble in November. But I think as far as the nomination goes, he's their guy now. And good luck.
Mick, do you think Chris has a point in terms of the timing of the legal battles that Trump faces, and also the fact that half of his party is choosing an alternate?
Sure. The timing is very interesting because, as Chris points out, there's a really good chance that Trump has enough delegates to secure the nomination before the end of March. I don't think there's any chance that any of the criminal proceedings against him will be completed by March. They might even not start by the end of March, depending on the way the Supreme Court handles things. So there's a chance that Donald Trump wraps all of this up, the nomination, before any of these things are resolved. That's really good for Trump. As to whether or not half of Iowa being against him is indicative, that doesn't bother me too much. Iowa's probably not a swing state. If you get down to Georgia and you start to see that again, that's going to be a problem for him. But Chris's larger point is absolutely correct. Trump can't afford to lose anybody. This election is going to be so close between him and Joe Biden, assuming it's still going to be Joe Biden in November, that you can't afford to lose 1 or 2%. Trump can't afford to lose a couple of folks who don't like the fact that he's convicted. Joe Biden's not going to be able to lose the Palestinian Americans in Michigan, for example. This is going to be a really tight election, and nothing about that changed last night.
Chris, what do you think about the media and I mean significant networks, including the Associated Press, calling the race for Trump while people were still lining up to vote and cast their ballots? I mean, why call it early? What in 2024? Why was that even an issue?
Yeah, I don't get that. I think they should have let the doors, close, let the caucus finish, while they're counting the votes. And it seems to be a long process. I was watching it on various networks all night last night, in between snaps of a very competitive NFL game, I might add.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.